Okay, I think we're good to go. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you. Okay, greetings everyone. Welcome to this session on assistive technology and AAC in the IEP. I'm Nancy Robinson and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers, Janice Reese, Sabina LaClair, and Saskia Splane, who are going to share with us the strategies for how to integrate these critical things into the IEP, an essential presentation. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to our presenters.
Hello, and welcome to our presentation entitled AT and AAC in the IEP. I'm Sabina LaClair, an SLP with the Tennessee Talks program. I'll be presenting today with my coworker, Saskia Splane, who is also an SLP working with the Tennessee Talks program and a local school district. Janice Reese, the director of our AT for Kids program, will be monitoring the chat room. So we'd like to thank everyone at Cough Drop for organizing the AAC in the Cloud conference. And we ask that you join us on track 1 in the Slack chat. And if you could just put in there what your occupation is or your interest in AAC, and also where you're from. We'd appreciate that. Thank you. So we want to tell you about the Tennessee Talks program real quick. Saskia and I both work for that program. It's a grant-funded project by the Tennessee Department of Education, which assists SLPs, school staff, and families in supporting students with complex communication needs. For more information about the Tennessee Talks program and the support we can provide, please visit our website, which we will be posting. We have also posted a link to our blog that contains the PowerPoint slides for you and a Wakelet with a list of our references, a quick reference handout for documenting AT and AAC in the IEP, and that'll all be posted in the blog on our website. So our first major disclaimer is we want to remind you that we are not lawyers. So for all legal questions, please seek legal counsel. But this presentation kind of came about because of a conversation Saskia and I had. We were questioning if we were correctly entering AAC devices and their use into the IEP, and wanted to make sure that we were complying with the state and the federal regulations. We had the good fortune to have many AT specialists and SLPs at the state level to discuss this topic with. So our learning objectives for this presentation are, we want you to have a basic understanding of the legal precedents and requirements surrounding assistive technology and how to include AAC and AT. We also want you to be able to identify how, when, and where to document AT and AAC devices and services throughout the IEP. Now we know this topic of IEPs is not dynamic and exciting, but it's a critical part of defining the services that we provide to our students with disabilities. Therefore, understanding the legal precedents and common documentation expectations makes our jobs easier. In the next hour, we will do our best to give you a good foundation on where and how to document AT and AAC in the IEP. So first, we do want to go over a few definitions before we get going into the heart of this presentation, because we know there's a variety of AAC learners, and we want everyone here to know the meanings of the acronyms that we're going to be using. So an IEP, an individual education program. This is the document that states how the school is going to meet the educational needs of a student with a disability through the special education program. The IEP is going to be completed by a team which includes the family, teachers, therapists, and other individuals that are important to the student. And with older students, they are also an integral part and invited to the IEP meetings because they need to be a part of this decision-making process. So the next thing is assistive technology. This is important as IDEA law mandates that the IEP team must consider if the student requires AT and/or AAC devices and services. Since we have to consider this on every IEP, we need to think about what assistive technology includes. It includes the devices or equipment that an individual needs to complete a task. Assistive technology also includes the services that an individual requires to use that AT device. With assistive technology, we are thinking about the evaluation process, purchasing, maintaining the equipment, and training for the student and other individuals, such as teachers, families, and therapists that will all interact with the student when they're using their device. So AAC, Augmentative Alternative Communication. This incorporates the many strategies and devices an individual may use to communicate, all the way from gestures, pictures, to speech generating devices. But we all use AAC. It's not just for our students with severe expressive communication deficits, but it's also helpful with language learning and communication for a variety of communicators. So the thing to remember is that AAC is only one type of assisted technology. So the information we are presenting today can be used to document many types of AT in the IEP, including AAC.
So now we're going to get into some of the legalities. So AAC, we got to get into the legal stuff. We're going to be short about it, but there are 4 acts that we need to know. We need to know the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Assistive Tech Act of 1998. So the Americans with Disabilities Act states that no qualified individual with a disability shall, by reason of such disability, be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of the services, programs, or activities of a public entity, or be subjected to discrimination by any such entity. So this is just saying that no individual with a disability can be excluded from participation in a public program. So that does include schools. So while it does include schools, the mandates, the requirements of ADA does not necessarily cover us completely. What is really nice about ADA is it says that existing services must be not just accessible, but have to be equally accessible. So it raises that bar. But the con of this is it can't provide those services if it poses an undue burden to, or an alternate or a fundamental alteration of the program or costs too much money. So our schools have a tight budget. So ADA is a difficult thing for them to acquire for that equal access. And this is not just for schools, right? ADA covers everybody, every publicly funded entity. So compliance with ADA does not equal IDEA compliance and vice versa. So IDEA, the pros are it does require schools to provide individualized supports necessary, regardless of that cost, regardless of the administrative burden, or regardless of any program alteration that has to be made. And it has to do so in order to ensure free and appropriate public education. And that says that materials have to be accessible to the student. The con of all of this is it only sets a floor of access to the education. So it doesn't set that equal access that ADA does, but it sets the floor of access. Another pro is that IDEA states that AT systems must comply with local and state policies. However, many states don't have a formal policy, and a lot of districts also don't have a formal policy, although some do.
So section 504, it does not explicitly state or reference AT, but states that all qualified individuals with a disability cannot be excluded from participation, benefits, or subjected to discrimination by any program that receives federal money. This includes schools and many other programs that our students participate in. The main point of this act is that it gave equal access to all individuals. And then we have the Assistive Tech Act, which is also known as the Tech Act. This defines AT as any item, piece of equipment, or product that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capability of an individual with a disability. So this act supports state programs in providing training, assistance, and increasing public awareness for AT. So we want to bring your attention to a resource. We received a lot of valuable information from this PowerPoint by Karen Hess. And for more information on the legalities and consequences of not addressing AT in the IEP, we would like you to consider watching this PowerPoint. She goes over many details about court cases and the outcomes of those court cases, and consistently shows that those districts that demonstrated good faith attempts in implementing and utilizing AT in accordance with that information that was placed in the IEP ended up with fewer legal actions taken against them.
So where and how do we actually put assistive technology and AAC in the IEP? So really, there's no one set place that you have to list it. There are 3 places that IDEA says it might be addressed, and it has to be in at least one of those 3 places. So the first one that it might be placed within is your special education parts, which is your present levels and your goals. The second part might be in your list of related services. That's where you're listing all of your IEP minutes, or it could be in your list of supplementary aids and services. And we'll go into detail into each of these. However, again, it could be in any one of these 3 places. It could be in all 3. It doesn't really matter. It is equally binding no matter where in the IEP it's located. I think Sabina and I both tend to err on the side of let's just put it in as many places as possible. That makes sense, just to make sure that we're covered and make sure that it's well, everyone on the team is well aware about the AT and AAC that needs to be used. So the first place it might be is in your special instructional factors. Now we realize that these terms might change state to state. So if that is, the terms might be a little different, but I'm pretty sure that every state has some form of little check boxes, and that's what this area is for us in Tennessee. So in special instructional factors are things like, is the student an English language learner? Is the student deaf or hard of hearing? It might ask about behavioral issues. It might ask about various other things. And in Tennessee, one of the questions that it asks is assistive technology necessary in order to implement the student's IEP? And in Tennessee, and I'm sure in other states, that box needs to be checked. If assistive technology is used, it needs to be checked. So it is the all important checkbox. So what if AT consideration occurs? So assistive technology.
And I'm going to very quickly go through this very simple tutorial that you should see on the screen.
I have no idea what happened.
We good? All right. So assistive technology considerations must be had at every single child's who has an IEP. And so when you check that box that, assistive technology is needed, you will list the type of assistance that's needed. If you already have AAC in place, great. And you would put a brief description of what that is. If AT consideration is needing to happen and you're not quite sure what's needed yet, you can put something to the effect of additional information is needed and we're going to do an AAC evaluation, or we're going to consult with outside AT professionals. We might be in the midst of trials when that IEP comes around, right? So you might say something to the effect of additional information is needed and trials are ongoing. You'll just put in whatever it is that's happening at the moment. Obviously include timelines if there is something in the mix of, trials or whatnot. And you can include any necessary services under supplementary aids and services, which we'll talk about later, if that has not, if it falls under that. So another great place to put it is in your present levels. AAC needs change, and the present level area is the perfect place to discuss the current needs of the student. So some things that you might be putting in the present levels are things like the current AAC is no longer effective for the student. And why is it no longer effective? And what is being done about that? What further assessment is needed at this time to be so that AAC can be effective for the student? You might put in the current trials and the results of those trials within the present level area. And you might put in the need for future assessments. If it's the very end of the school year and you're saying, well, okay, like, here's what we've done this year and going on to next year, he probably needs to, he's coming up on 5 years and is needing a new device next year. We need to be looking at assessment. Or that the student's current system is effective, and include examples. Examples are key. So here are just some examples that you might use. I'm going to give you tons of resources of other places that are also have present level examples that can also be used. So I'll put those in the chat. So present level examples: the student is non-speaking with his school provided speech generating device, which includes all these great features. He is able to respond to questions during group circle times and communicate basic wants and needs. So that's a nice generic example. What are those features that are making this successful for this student? Or you could use specific names of devices. And this is done only in the present level area. And you can do it in the following way. Student has received instruction and is beginning to effectively use a speech generating device with customizable core and fringe vocabulary during an engaging social conversation with peers. Student has been successfully using a school provided iPad with Cough Drop app, Core 60 vocabulary set to accomplish this at this time. So you're including not only the name of the system, but also the details. Why is that system working for that student? And I have another example there, but I won't read it out to us. Some additional resources are WADI and Quiet. So the Wisconsin folks did a great job. That resource is amazing. And then also the quality indicators for assistive technology services. They also have a really great guiding document all about how to add those present levels in, and I will add those into the chat as well.
So we also want to talk about goals and the IEP goals within the special education area. You may want to document AT or AAC within that goals section. But as Saskia mentioned, the Quiet document, it's guiding document for including assistive technology in the IEP, which we will post the links to. It states that AT is not the goal, but the means to achieving the goal. So if you think of it as this is how you're going to achieve your goal, AT may be added in the annual goal if a device is going to be used to achieve that goal, and you'll be stating why the assistive technology is necessary to acquire the goal. So where do we document in the goals? And what we're going to say is documenting AT in the goals section can be done in the goal itself, but also in related services and the support for school personnel sections. Remember, when writing a goal, this is usually not the place to document or name the device, but only a description of that device. One thing you could say is the student will use their dynamic display communication device. However, frequently, our students will be using a combination of communication methods. So then it's best to write your goal stating the student will be using total communication, such as signs, gestures, vocalizations, and/or a speech generating device. We kind of recommend writing your goals more with the total communication because it does leave you open to some other situations that we'll discuss later about what if that device isn't available. So one example of an AAC goal would be, in a classroom discussion and partner work, the student will repair miscommunications using total communication. And then this goes into your state and district guidelines, but ours says in 3 out of 4 attempts with 20% cues over 4 out of 5 consecutive sessions. So you'll need to frame your goals so that they comply with your district guidelines. However, as you hear, the sample goal did not state the specific device, but only used that the student would use total communication because that student may use a variety of communication methods to express themselves and achieve that goal. So language and communication become the focus of our goal, but not the device. Remember that documenting in the documenting AT is not mandatory in all of these sections, but each part of the IEP kind of helps to define the services and provide a background of the student's current ability and their needs and their strengths. So we want to just take you back to your grad school days. Writing an AAC goal, it's kind of like writing other language goals. They need to follow your state and district guidelines, as we've said. And a good acronym to remember is a goal should be SMART. It needs to be specific, measurable, attainable by the student, relevant to what they're doing, and timely. So Lauren Enders has a great blog post in Practical AAC on how to write SMART goals that teach, not test. And again, we'll be posting that. That is in our Wakelet. So we've listed multiple resources here that are available in the Wakelet, and that is all available through the blog link that we're giving you. But these resources will help you with writing your AAC goals. They look at many facets of AAC use, from social aspects to language aspects, also making the student independent with their device. So one of these resources is by Linda Burkhart, and she had some great thoughts on writing goals. And it just reminds us to keep the goals objective and measurable, but not to make the assessment the basis of that goal. So learning is best measured in a natural context, and communication intent should always be the focus of the goal, not having that student respond with those rote statements.
So another place that your AAC might be listed is in your list of related services. So some states may require you to add the device. Oh, sorry. So this is your list of your services. So you're going to have your special education services, your reading supports, your math supports, your language services, your direct language services, and you might have an additional one for assistive technology. If you have an assistive technology person in your district, that might be where that's listed. A lot of times, I know in my district, we list it under the related service area that is needed for the training of that technology. So it could just be an additional, it's part of speech language pathology in their language services. They are receiving training on how to use their AAC device. You might also have an OT who needs to be a part of that team who is working on accessing that device. So it could be in various forms, but there is an ability to add assistive technology as one of your related services. So another place, which is the supplementary aids and services. This is a spot in the IEP that has a few different meanings. In the state of Tennessee, if you click the AT box that I talked about earlier, where it says, yes, this student uses AT, it automatically requires you to fill out the supplementary aids and services box. That's not the original intent of the box, but it's not going to hurt anything. It does in Tennessee, it makes us list out how often that is used. So it's a good way in Tennessee to say all day, every day. Every day of the school year, they're using it. The original intent of the supplementary aids and services was as a spot to put assistive technology that is used for students who, by students who use it relatively independently. They don't need a bunch of training on it, they're just using it. So a lot of our adult AAC users here in the conference, it would be listed under their supplementary aids because they're using it independently, which is great and awesome, and where the end goal is, right? So that is where it is listed, is the supplementary aids. However, again, some of your states might mandate that if you click the box, it needs to be listed. It's not going to hurt, but it's an additional thing to know. Other places in the IEP that AAC can be recorded, these are completely optional. These are not IDEA spots where they list that it should be in one of these 3 areas. These are the non-3 areas that it still might be in addition. So it might be in that strength statement, you know, what are the students' strengths? Using AAC might be one of those to communicate. It could also be in accommodations and modifications or in the alternate assessment area. It could be in the transition services area, in the non-academic and extracurricular activities, or in the meeting minutes, which I would think would be used primarily for that AT consideration piece and the results of that consideration. So if an AT consideration is made and it's determined that nope, AT is not necessary, that could just be a quick blurb in the meeting minutes so that you are showing that you have considered assistive technology for that student. So as I said, accommodations and modifications or in that alternative assessment might be an area. And something to keep in mind when you're thinking about accommodations and modifications is when it comes to state testing, an accommodation can't invalidate the construct being tested. So if they're testing the, you know, fluency of a student reading, well, assistive technology may or may not impact that, right? So it's important to review your state and local guidelines for what is allowed as a testing accommodation for that standardized testing, just to be on the safe side, just so you're aware of what is needed or not. On the flip side, assistive technology cannot be, you know, not used during, it can be not used during testing, but we still need to be using it in the classroom if it's deemed necessary by the team. It doesn't have to be used during testing if that's not allowed, but we need to make sure we're providing it for the students in order to access their curriculum. AAC also needs to be used regularly during all classroom activities in order for it to be a testing accommodation. So it kind of goes both ways. Transition services. So AT can be listed with transition services. The best example I can think of for this is if you have a student who is about to graduate and they need their family and they need to know who to go to for assistive technology services after they're not with the school system anymore, right? They need to find, you know, those funding services. They need to find technical support. They need to know what's out there so that, you know, when they're an adult, they don't just lose service supports in that regard.
So we've gone through the definitions, we've gone through the acts that kind of set up and guide us through entering stuff in the IEP. And then we've gone through the IEP and where you can document stuff and how to document it. But we've always had these questions that kind of come up that are just specific little questions that we've been asked by people in the Tennessee Talks program, or we've thought of ourselves that have just come up on the spur of the moment. And so we're going to go through some questions and answers because we want to let you know just some more information on things you might see. So if you have that student who's using an iPad, let's say with cough drop during the school day to communicate, so how do you think you would document this in the IEP? Feel free to put some responses in the chat on this. And then also we'll give you a response on how we think it might be done. So on to Saskia to tell us about how we're going to answer this.
All right. Well, first of all, I would check my box, the Special Considerations Assistive Technology box, and state that AAC was needed and more information was in my present levels and goals. So present levels, I have it written here. Student currently uses a dynamic display device that contains customizable core and fringe vocabulary and has remote modeling capabilities for team members during virtual learning due to COVID-19. Student has been successfully utilizing Cough Drop app on a school-provided iPad during virtual learning for the past year. Student has demonstrated all the beautiful things that they have done this year, all the skills. And then obviously the goal would be corresponding to whatever the student was needing. This is just one example. Obviously, I'm a new SLP. This is my first year. So, you know, we all have our ways of wording things. But it lists not only the specific features of Cough Drop that the student was finding useful, but it also names the system since the child has been successful with it.
So another related question is, my student is utilizing a specific device during the school day. Should you name that device? So that everyone knows, because there's times when you may switch from being their SLP and they may switch to another SLP. So do we need to list that device? And if I do name the device, is my district obligated to provide that specific device?
All right, so this one's our controversial piece and we know it. The main point is check with your district policy. So if they do have a policy in place, then you have to follow it. But check with that policy, because if that is the case, if they do have a policy that says that please don't name the device, please, please, please be very specific with the features of what the child system has, so that any incoming SLP or assistive technology person can figure out what they have been using. You know, kids move. I work in a very rural district and our kids seem to move all the time. And I want to make sure that any kid that leaves my district and goes to somewhere else, that the people who they're going to know exactly what they were on, if it was, especially if it was a school provided device. Obviously reaching out to the previous SLP or assistive tech person would be key, but sometimes it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. So if that is not your district policy, I would encourage you, if the student is using the device and using it with proficiency, then list it, along with also the features that are necessary in order for it to be successful for them. Why is it successful for them? descriptive language is necessary no matter if you're listing the name of the device or not. But we need to be able to locate a specific, you need to know the specific features that are used that the student finds useful in order to get a substitute if needed, if the original system is unavailable for whatever reason. And this is why we only list it in the present levels, because if we list it anywhere else, we might run into problems.
And I'm seeing in the chat
I
room
know
that
it's-
a lot of districts are doing the same thing. I mean, we both have been recommended by our district not to list the name of the device so that the school is not on the hook for providing Proloquo, cough drop, a
But I also
Tobii
see
Dynavox.
other people who say, you know, we can name in the present levels and meeting minutes, but not in any other areas. And that is what we are suggesting if your district allows it. Just because then it's just saying, this is what they're currently using. This is what they're currently using. And as I said, we knew this was our most controversial slide.
So one of the most asked and debated questions about AT and AAC is the funding. This has led to a lot of conversations in our peer learning community that we have in the state of Tennessee. And it's a delicate situation because, as we know, school districts throughout the country don't have money to purchase unlimited amount of devices. And if I'm going to write this evaluation and recommend a specific device or program, who's going to fund it? Because I don't want to get called out by the superintendent or my principal or someone at the district office that I have now placed them responsible for purchasing a device that costs thousands of dollars.
So who has to fund it? Well, the short answer is it is the school district. However, they are not required to actually buy the device. It obviously is one of the more popular options because that's easy for the school district. But they could buy it, they could rent it, they could borrow it from a AT library, like Sabina and Janice and I have. They could purchase it, or they could assist the family with going through their insurance. And this is one I would suggest that, you know, you encourage your district to encourage families to go through their private insurance. They cannot require that. They cannot mandate that the family has to go through their insurance. However, there are some really great benefits for the family having that device as theirs. You know, it's the student's device. It goes with them. It is with them no matter what. It is their device. You know, there's no issues with, you know, does it go home? Does it not? Like, a lot of those issues just kind of disappear when it is the student's device, which is really nice. And then the school district really likes it because they don't have to pay for it. So it really does have some really great benefits. So again, remember when we talked about IDEA and that pro and cons list? IDEA states that if an AAC system is required, that it has to be funded by the school. But IDEA also might not provide for the best system for that student. So as long as it's, you know, adequate, then the school is golden. But is it really what's necessarily best? Not necessarily. So that's where the laws that we talked about earlier really come into play with what we're talking about, which is why, you know, we always try to encourage our families to go through their insurance, because then we can get them, you know, the best and greatest that we can, as long as we can justify it to the insurance company.
And based on something else that I've been working on for our Tennessee Talks program, if the family goes through their insurance and they are denied, there are some funding sources out there. And in this fall, we're planning on putting out a list of funding sources. Ours will be include those that are specific to Tennessee and also national sources that our families could look at for either funding a portion of the device, such as if you have a copay or something like that, or if the device is denied through your insurance for purchase, looking at putting together some supplemental funding to get that device. And again, if it's done in this outside manner, the device would belong to the student. So as therapists, we've all come across this at some point. A student shows up to school and they don't have their device. It doesn't matter if it's soaked in the bathtub or left at home. We still have to maintain the IEP compliance and FAPE. So what do we do when this happens? And what can we do to prevent this or be prepared so we're not scrambling around last minute trying to figure out how we're going to maintain IEP compliance when this device maybe was soaked in the bathtub and we're not going to have a device for a while.
So this is why you write your specifics in your present levels area and leave the rest of the areas as generic AAC. And also, I would suggest, for sure, including some paper-based backup systems in the IEP as well. Or if you have classroom iPads that are available to students, that might be another option. The district is still obligated to provide FAPE. So AAC is not put on hold just because a device is broken or not returned to the school or what have you. The student should have a backup available to them. You know, I've been listening to the presentations, and I know last year a big a thread that kind of ran through a lot of the AAC users that were presenting was backup systems and systems upon systems upon systems. So just because we're using a speech generating device does not mean that's the only way that person communicates. And so we need to be clear in the present level area that they're communicating in lots of different ways. And, you know, we can help with getting that communication more and more adequate throughout. And it doesn't have to necessarily be on that speech generating device. But, you know, backup systems, make sure they're written into the IEP.
So it looks like a lot of people are commenting on the funding sources. If you want, go to the Tennessee Talks website. There's supposed to be an area in there that we've just added that we will send out little notices to you when we've updated blogs and stuff. I am pretty close to having that PowerPoint together that's just listing funding sources. And so then you would receive a notification that that's been posted. But there are a lot of sources out there and it took a lot of time to sort through them. So another question that we've had asked of us is, you're sitting in that IEP meeting and you have a parent that all of a sudden says, hey, I've got an iPad and Johnny's using this iPad and they have cough drop on it and they're doing great with it at home. And your eyes get big and you're like, okay, this student's new to me and it's not documented in their IEP. So now what do you do? Do we have to use that exact app and device at school? And how do we have to incorporate this AAC into our services?
So the answer is, you know, no matter where the need is found, we have to address it. So we can find it either at school or we can find it at home. If school personnel note that AAC is needed, that there's some sort of communication support that's needed, an SLP is called in, you know, we do an eval, and AAC evaluation might be triggered along with that. Likewise, if you're in that IEP meeting and that parent comes in and says, hey, like they've been using cough drop, and you go, okay. It does trigger an obligation for the school to look into AAC as an option for that student. It does not obligate the school to that specific device, that specific app. It does obligate an AAC evaluation. It does obligate that consideration of assistive technology to be reconsidered. And that's because, right, if it's working at home, it probably is going to work at school, and vice versa. And so it's just a matter of looking at the student as a whole. You know, they're themselves no matter where they're at. And so we got to, you know, assist with everywhere that we are. So yeah, either one.
So during the past year with COVID, virtual learning, and this new world that we've been thrown into, a hot topic in our district, and I know in Saskia's district, has been, does the school have to send a school-owned device home? I was actually in an IEP meeting and had a family say, so are you going to send that iPad home? And the teacher said, no, you can use your own device. And I jumped right in and said, oh, wait, we need to discuss this.
Yes, because the answer is, it's a hard maybe. It's an IEP team decision. So IDEA states that on a case-by-case basis, the use of school-purchased assistive technology devices in the child's home or in other settings is required if this child's IEP team determines that the child needs access to those devices in order to receive FAPE. And an AAC user, I would argue, needs access across environments to communication. Now, I know there are users who choose not to use it at home. We heard from one of them yesterday, Lydia, I believe. But, you know, especially for our early learners who are just emergent communicators who need AAC, they're not necessarily making that choice yet, although they might be. So I'd be advocating for it to be sent back and forth in most cases. But according to IDEA, it is a team decision. My argument that I presented to my administration, I'm brand new to my school district, and they had never sent devices home over the summer. And my argument to my district was, well, they're using a device for language acquisition and for communication support, and in order to access their curriculum throughout the day. But language development doesn't stop when they go home. It doesn't stop when they leave the school building. And, you know, we've trained the parents to do some aided language input, and, you know, they're getting that support from me. We need to provide this technology so they can continue receiving that support. My administration was very open to hearing that. They just had never heard it before. Some districts might be a little more hesitant, but it's something to think about. And it's, you know, when you frame it as language development, that's really the strongest argument you have to stand on.
And also letting them know that they need to remain in compliance with federal regulations. That usually changes a lot of people's opinion on sending it home. And I know Saskia and I both talked about how we then went to our districts and found out what their tech agreement was, and you could send that home. And that usually alleviates more of the concerns that the district has if you use that same tech agreement that they would for sending a Chromebook or some other device home. Yes.
And then in the IEP, the best place that I have found to put that information is in the special considerations area. There is a box that we have here in Tennessee that just says, you know, what is the student's primary mode of communication? And in that box, I would just list something to the effect, hold on, that's our next question, actually. Where do we put it in the IEP?
So you're already answering it, just go on with it.
Answering it. So a good place to document is in that special considerations area, either in the communications section or in the assistive technology section. And the answer is just yes. And, you know, AAC is needed. AAC system will travel from school to home daily. There, it's a nice little blurb. It's just right there. And yeah.
So now it's time for your questions or comments. If you'd please type them into the chat and we'll try and address them, or have kind of a collaborative discussion about how things are in your district.
It's
And
Sabina.
then, yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. We had a question a minute ago from Cassandra Campbell. She wanted to know, how do you address AAC devices that continue to be broken while at home or sent back without being charged? So I didn't know if you wanted to address that one openly.
I don't mind starting with the charging thing. A couple of things that I've personally done with devices that are not being charged is, one thing I did is I actually wrote a goal for the student to learn and kind of take charge of their device. So we had a goal that stated that the student was going to learn how to plug in their device at night, and then they were going to also learn how to get to the homepage and just kind of navigate it. I put some of that back on the student. Now with our little bitties, it doesn't always work, but you would be surprised how young I can have a student taught to plug in their device and to navigate to that homepage. I mean, it's not uncommon to have a kindergartner that just knows if you do it over and over, and just writing that as a goal kind of helps that part of it. And then the second part you said is devices that are always broken. This is where your district kind of starts getting upset with sending that device home. And that is why I had the situation in my IEP where they didn't want to send the device home because that was the bathtub. The kid had put the device in the bathtub, and it was an expensive device, and the school felt very frustrated. I tried to then look at going through the parents' funding and helping them obtain the device themselves. If you can do that, that's a really good place to start, because then that device, they have ownership in it. And if it's broken, it's more on the parents' hands to send that back. And I recommend that they get a device that has a nice warranty for those families too. Saskia may have some other comments too.
No, warranties are beautiful things though, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of the devices, if you think about getting an iPad versus the app, and then the more of a speech generating device like an all-encompass device, for those students that are breaking them a lot, those companies will provide a multi-year warranty when you first purchase them.
And I wanted to point out too that like we talked about the multimodal communication and, you know, providing print based versions of their communication layouts and things, that is actually something I hate to say resort to, but if we have a child who's especially destructive sometimes to the high-tech systems, or negligent, or we have a history of them being left on, you know, in the cars and the heat and what have you, when we see that, we generally replicate their layouts and we put that in a print format for them. And that way they have access to their communication pages at home, but you've just, like you said, on a case-by-case basis, you've determined that it is not a good idea to send a really expensive device home with that child if it's going to be neglected or not cared for, or if it's coming back all the time and it's never been turned on. You know, when we're logging into the analytics and you can see that it's going home on Friday and sitting in the backpack and never being used, we still have an obligation to send it. But sometimes I'll say to the parents, if this is too much, why don't I send you a communication book home instead, so that you can quickly have that with you out at the table and in the car, and that kind of takes care of that too, because when they get broken, we do have to repair them. And that gets pricey.
And a lot of our districts don't have the money to continue to do that, and that does become a problem. But like you said, providing the rapid access methods and notebooks and stuff really does still provide a communication method. And many of the different apps, I know that you can go in even and print. So you could print exactly what you have, so it's compatible with what you're using at the school.
Exactly. That's what I was talking about. Yeah.
So to go on, if there's not any more questions, I do want to mention one more website. If you'll skip down 2 more, Saskia. If you have questions or want to find out more information related to AAC, you can locate your state AT program by using the AT3 Center. It gives you some great resources. And then there's a whole bunch of national organizations. We just picked Isaac. It's one that we like and know about, but there's a lot of organizations out there that have great information to kind of help you with putting AT into your IEPs and answering these questions. And you're always free to email Saskia and I. We have our website, our emails here, and we can post those for you. Were there any more questions that anyone had or comments that they wanted to share?
There are a couple of people who made note that they don't have text sections within their IEP where they would note that the child could take the device transition between home and school. What are your suggestions on that? Because ours does, so I don't really know where they would put that. Do you think maybe underneath the related services? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it really just depends on where your state has those text boxes, because it really does just change depending on which state you're in. And I mean, anywhere, and the only reason we selected that spot was just because it made logical sense. Again, anywhere you document it in the IEP, it is still valid. It still holds no matter where you put it. It's just a matter of where does it make the most logical sense for your documentation system. I wish I had a better answer than that. It's hard to in your specific state's information.
One of the things I was taught early on by my supervisor when I was coming out of school is kind of think of the IEP as a story, and you're really trying to portray that student's story. So think about where in your document you can portray that information. Even if it's, you know, in a little text box that you have somewhere that we don't have, or if it's in that present level that, you know, Susie has this device and it's transferring between home and school, but it is a school-owned device. It's okay to put it somewhere like that. It's just to document stuff because our students move, or we may get transferred to another school or not be there. And the next person needs to pick this up and know what the student's doing and not start from the beginning again.
All right. Well, we'll go back through the chat and answer any questions that we might have missed. But thank you so much for having us. And cough drop.
Yes, thank you to everyone for participating. I love all the comments in the chat room.
Well, thank you to our presenters for such an in-depth presentation. I'm going to make sure that all my students watch this before they do their school internships.
Oh, thank you.
This is fabulous. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, and also the survey for this session is in the Slack. So if you find the link, you can fill out the survey. Thank you all, and thanks to Cough Drop.